Cara. God be with you, my soul friends. Hello. Agus beannach tí dé leis may blessings of God be with you. This has been brewing in me for the last definitely year, probably a bit more. And I just started getting a hint of the St. Patrick and the Snakes post. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to bring my voice into this conversation, and that I hope it can help be an active catalyst of peace making between the different sects, right? There's the Catholic Christian side, and then there's the people that are returning the snakes and this kind of pagan druidic wave that's coming, and they're all welcome here. All aspects of that are welcome. I have explored all aspects of that and very much take a non-dual perspective in this. The fact that I am an ordained woman teaching about Christian things already makes me someone who would have likely been burned at the stake or prosecuted or excommunicated from the church. So I absolutely am in fellowship with all sides, having sat with this from multiple different angles. So to begin, I want to just name a little bit of my ancestry, because what I'm sharing today very much feels like it's coming out of my embodied ancestral heritage. So I am an O'Driscoll, and in Irish that is Ní Drisciol. I am daughter of O'Driscoll. And if we go all the way back, it goes back to the clan of Hay Drisciol, which were the storytellers, and they were rooted in West Cork, around Baltimore, Cape Clear. They also kind of ended up coming in as far as Skibbereen, and they were renowned pirates, or we were renowned pirates, I should say. And they had the biggest fleet in all of Ireland, and had castles down in Baltimore and on Cape Clear, and that was their stronghold, right? And so on the island of Cape Clear, before St. Patrick, there was a saint, Saint Ciarán. So his mother was of the O'Driscoll clan, and he was one of the first saints to come and bring the gospel of Christ to Ireland. So this is before St. Patrick. There was a few other ones as well. St. Declan landed in Ardmore, and I also happen to have spent a lot of my childhood in Ardmore because my granddad has a caravan there. So feeling the connection from both sides of these pre-Patrick saints that came to Ireland. And then, of course, St. Patrick came, and he is renowned for bringing Christianity to Ireland in a much more widespread way. And the traditional trope or saying is he banished the snakes. And we don't actually have snakes that live in Ireland. We only have 3 reptiles and amphibians. So we have a frog, a newt, and a toad. And a lizard. But we don't have any snakes. We never have, because just biologically, geographically, we're just outside the temperature kind of envelope that would let us have reptiles, because reptiles are cold-blooded animals. They need to lie in the heat. Anyone who's been to Ireland knows that there's not very much heat in Ireland, so reptiles don't do well here. The lizards that are here are found in kind of very sunny spots, so I know there's a good few along Ballycotton. So we never actually had snakes. So what are the snakes? The snakes would have been more related to the snake in the Bible as the face of Satan, or this kind of cunning, wily creature that was, egging people on to sin, to forget God, and to kind of get lost away from the light. So that's what the story is speaking to when it says Patrick got rid of the snakes. And I want to speak to that a little bit more, again, from my ancestral heritage and my own experience as a Christian lineage, and how I'm feeling this kind of conversation around the snakes and the snakes returning. So like I said, the O'Driscoll clan were pirates, and they had a very messy history. They actually had a lot of warfare with the Vikings that would have been based in Waterford. So these were 2 areas of intense warfare, and these are actually the 2 spots where the two of the saints that came before Patrick, Ciarán and Declan, that's where they came in, where there was really high contention. And of course, Christ's gospel is a gospel of mercy, a gospel of forgiveness, a gospel of embodied love and self-sacrificing love. So it would have been a really radical thing to come into Ireland at that time, when there was lots of tribes that would have been warring, whether they were Viking or Irish. There was a lot of interfighting between Irish chieftains and the like. Irish people were renowned for being fairly brutal. Like, the Romans wrote about them, and they were kind of like the heathens at the edge of Europe that everyone was a bit too scared to go near. So again, there's a great sense of like courageous conviction in these saints to have come back to Ireland and to be evangelizing in an area that was kind of so fraught with tension, and also with a very rich Celtic heritage that would have been here. So that's the kind of landscape. So when I was connecting more deeply with this lineage, it took me a while actually to reconnect with this specific lineage, like the O'Driscoll side of my family. Because when I did some lineage repair work through Dr. Daniel Fora's method of ancestral healing, I found it to be quite dense. So it took me a good while to get there, and last year was the year that I really dove into it and went visiting and followed the threads and found out a lot more about who they were. And because they were pirates, there was a lot of war, there was a lot of hardship, there was a lot of stealing and treachery. You know, they were definitely scoundrels. And as you can imagine, a group of people like that would have had a lot to repent for. And repenting in a Christian term just means to have a change of heart, to go, I once was a thieving scoundrel and now I'm choosing a different way. And so Saint Kieran came, and they were actually one of the first clans in Ireland to convert. And from my own lived experience, and from the line of the gospel where Christ says, you know, the doctor does not come to those who are well, he comes to the sick. And likewise, Christ didn't come to be with the righteous, he came to call the sinners. So Christ inherently comes to the darkest aspects of the human consciousness. And like for me in my life, it's definitely been in the darkest places that I have felt the light of Christ the brightest, because it's like, how on earth can we embody and share a gospel and a story that is about forgiveness and mercy if we haven't received that ourselves? So it is often the people that have walked through the darkest valleys that end up bringing the gospel of Christ forward, because we get it, because we've been in this really dark place. So the O'Driscoll clan would have been one of the first groups to do that. And my own sense of the lineage is that there was a lot of darkness, a lot of bitterness, a lot of revenge and murder and, you know, hatred and harm. Like all of the kind of denser tones of humanity would have been very much present there. And even if you go down to Baltimore today, you see signs and read history about a massacre that happened where I think Algerians came up and there was a huge massacre in the harbour. So there's also like a huge amount of grief. So it's a really how would I say it? Like dense, dark, heavy, grief-stricken kind of lineage, right? And they were one of the first people in Ireland to hear the gospel of Christ and have this heart-opening encounter and really take this on. So I'm going to bring us back now to Saint Patrick. And like I said, I very much am taking a dualistic or a non-dual perspective of this. Like, I'm an embodied woman. I have deeply centered into the power of my feminine power, the power of my womb. The Sheila na gig day, the day of honoring the Sheila na gig, which is this like feminine icon that is scratched into some 13th and 14th century churches around Europe, but largely preserved in Ireland, are like of a woman like crouched over, like opening her vulva. And the best description I have heard of her is of a woman in childbirth. And so I'm in deep relationship with like the deep power of Eros that has largely been eradicated by people who have mishandled the Christian lineage. And what I'm speaking to is a differentiation between the golden thread of what is true Christian teaching and the ways that our ancestors have mishandled it and not worked with it correctly, because they're different things. And a lot of the time we look through the whole lens of Christian history through the mishandling of people and not through the grace of God. And that's an error in view, and it's valid, and that needs to be sat with and processed. But it doesn't let us actually feel the truth of God or the truth of the gospel. And that's what I want to speak into here and hopefully bring some more perspective. So because a lot of the narratives that we see now, because over the last few years, this kind of resurrection of the snake, the return of the feminine has been very alive, and has been really like bubbling up in the Irish psyche. Just 2 years ago, I was out for St. Patrick's Day in all red, dancing and really, feeling the snake energy. So like I said, again, I'm very much like feeling both sides of this. But I am sick of just hearing how Partick was a colonizer and kind of forcibly pushed the Christian faith on the Irish people, because that is not my experience when I feel it in my body. I do not think that that's what happened. So I want to bring us back to the story of St. Patrick, and I'm also noticing I'm talking very fast because I'm excited and passionate, so I'm going to slow down a little bit and take a pause. So St. Patrick was from Wales, and if you've ever been to Wales, it's actually remarkable. They have 60% language retention, as in the language is used about 60%, so most people speak it. If you go into a shop, you actually hear people speak Welsh more than you hear them speak English. Very different, to Irish, like it's a Gaelic language, but it's very different. And their history of oppression was with the Romans, so they too were an indigenous peoples. Yes, they were part of the British colonies, but Wales is its own distinct cultural region. So St. Patrick was from what I would feel is a sister isle or a sister land to Ireland, like an indigenous land that was colonized by Romans, and the British spent a lot of time fighting off the Romans. So Patrick was from there, and he was actually kidnapped by Irish raiders. They came over, raided, kidnapped people, probably took cattle and stuff as well, and women and whatever else that they wanted, and brought him back to Ireland. And he spent about 5 or 6 years as a captive and working as a shepherd in Ireland. So he was a slave, he was captured and taken away from his homeland. And then he spent a lot of time in the Irish landscape, the Irish wilderness, and working with sheep, which is a very solitary experience. And while he was in that very solitary experience, he really deepened into the Christian faith. And this really mirrors what we see as a very common thread. If you look at Irish history, Celtic Irish history or Celtic Christian history, is on the Isle of Saints and Sinners. We had Saints and Sinners, the Isle of Saints and Scholars. We might also say the Isle of Saints and Sinners. We have a bit of everyone here. There was a lot of nature mystics, people who would have spent a lot of time out in the wilderness, communing with God, deepening their faith, and very in tune with nature. So Patrick was one of them. He was outside a lot, solitarily in nature with the sheep, and deepening his connection with God. And so eventually either he escaped or he was freed, I'm not totally sure which. And he went back to Wales for a time, and then he felt a very strong calling to go back to Ireland. So to go back to the place of the perpetration of his abuse, the land of his captors who had stolen him, had kept him hostage. He felt called to go back there and preach the gospel. So straight away, and he was going as a wandering barefoot mystic, just like Yeshua was, just like Jesus was. He wasn't going with an army. He wasn't going to fight back. He wasn't going to get revenge. Patrick went as a wild wandering nature mystic, as he had been while he had been in Ireland as a shepherd. So he went and proceeded to walk around Ireland and preached the gospel. And he's famous for the shamrock. He used the shamrocks and the 3 leaves on the shamrock to teach about the Trinity, so the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And if we go back to Irish culture at that time, there would have been a lot of like pagan practices. So there would have been different worship to different gods and goddesses in the Celtic pantheon. There would have been different rituals. There would have been sacrifices. There would have been blood sacrifices. Like I said, there was still like a lot of warring. There was probably a lot of poverty, and yeah, like, you know, kind of, I think Ireland has historically struggled to make peace within the Isle, which has left it inherently more vulnerably open to like colonizing forces, like later on the British coming in, because a lot of the kings in Ireland wouldn't really agree on things, and there would be a lot of infighting, which makes any nation, if they can't unite, a lot more like vulnerable. If as a nation of Ireland, as an island, the people there can't unite, that inherently creates a lot of fracture and division. So there was a lot of that fracture and division. And because there's lots of different types of goddess and goddesses, you can imagine that there would have been lots of different altars, lots of different rules, lots of different ways to worship, lots of different protocols. And so it would have been like a very diverse and rich, and a lot of the like kind of pagan Irish revivalism and Indigenous Irish revivalism that's happening at the moment is really like lifting up the deep richness of the Celtic and the pagan Irish like spiritual heritage. Like there's a lot of beauty there. And again, I have sat with lots of this stuff and come to like a really deep embodied respect and reverence for it. And also, we are absolutely naive if we think those rituals at that time did not also include sacrifice, blood sacrifice of animals, blood sacrifice perhaps of people. And of course, inherently, there's lots of like warring and praying to different gods and then go raiding another tribe. So there's a lot of blood sacrifice bound up in the prayer at that time. And this kind of translates across the world. Like it's kind of where human consciousness was at the time. It's not to say, oh, Irish people are worse than other people, or that was really terrible or whatever. Like it was just where we were at as a culture, as a people. And we have a very strong tendency now, as we're reviving and reconnecting to these Indigenous ways, to absolutely glorify them and revere them and paint them as these perfect ways, like, you know, these ways that were like matrilineal and everything was golden, or yeah, like a golden age. And the reality is it just wasn't. Not at the time that Partick was coming anyway. Like this is just after Christ. And this is historically like a really dark and difficult time for humanity, which is part of why Christ came in. Now, there's loads of mechanics behind that I'm not going to get into right now. But, you know, we were in like a dense place as a collective, like across the human culture. So we see in the Bible, there was lots of child sacrifice, all in the Old Testament, of like the Canaanites and the Amorites, and it would have been the same in many places across the world. So that's not like something surprising or new, but it is something that I notice is very little talked about nowadays in our Indigenous revivalism, which is beautiful, as I've said, which is important, but we also need to make sure that we're not just glorifying the old way and just putting it up, pedestalizing it in a way that isn't helpful. So I'll say here that my felt sense of true Christianity, like the golden lineage of Christ's teachings, not the mishandling of our ancestors, but like the true energetic body, the light body of Christ. When the light body of Christ comes and meets any culture, what remains, what is true remains. Which is why across the world you have lots of different flavors of Christianity, because it came to Ireland and it like overlaid, collaborated and merged with what was there. everybody talks about this in a way that it was just all like eradicated and warred over and everything like that. I don't feel that is true in my body. That's not my felt sense of it at all. I think sometimes that was done, of course, and I think that bubble of sometimes has been put up on a big projection screen. I think a lot of the time Christian faith was shared by people like Partick, who were emulating Christ, wandering nature mystics who were going and speaking to people. And in a time where there would have been lots of different altars, lots of different ways to worship, lots of different rules to follow, it would have been such a relief for people to hear that that no longer applies, and that they are loved just as they are, that they are forgiven, and that there is a merciful God that will just receive them exactly as they are, that they don't have to do a monkey dance, that they don't have to like tap the stone 8 times and twirl around and make an offering on the altar or whatever. I'm being kind of, I don't know what the word is, sardonic, or overly simplistic, and making assumptions. I don't know what those rituals were at the time, but there would have been a lot of protocol and a lot of ways. And part of what Christ offers all of us, even today, is that we don't need to follow those rigid rules of religiosity anymore. That just having a pure, sincere heart and genuinely repenting, genuinely having a change of heart and asking for forgiveness and being willing to give forgiveness and being able to receive the generosity of God and then give the generosity of God, simply being open to that was like opening this new bandwidth of spiritual nourishment that people at that time wouldn't have experienced before, because Christ's alchemical act on the cross brought in a new level of consciousness that did not exist on the planet until he completed that cycle of journeying through the underworld and resurrecting. So the gospel of Christ was inherently bringing something new. And my experience is, like, if this is the culture that was already existing, the message of Christ comes in. People talk about it like it's this dominating force that comes in and just crushes everything and eradicates it and whitewashes it. That is viewing it through institutionalism. That's viewing it through what certain branches of Christianity have become and looking at it through lenses like the Crusades. It's not truthfully looking at it from the on the ground level that most of it was being spread through, which was like word of mouth, storytelling, teaching, person to person, like sitting around a fire, which would have also been very congruent to Irish culture of, say, like the Anspalpine Fánach, the wandering traveller who would go from house to house and telling stories. Like, people had a great fondness for that. So chances are a Welsh guy who had been a slave in Ireland, who was now coming back with all these stories and was preaching a story of redemption and a story of salvation in the sense of liberation from darkness and liberation from suffering. I'm sure many people received Partick into their home with hugely generous hearts and a lot of joy. I'm also sure that many people were skeptical of him and weren't sure. And I'm sure, like Christ, word began to spread from people to people. And again, like Christ, I'm sure lots of people disagreed with him and other people were following him around like sheep because they were fascinated by what he had to say. So that is my sense of how Christianity spread, as opposed to it being some type of colonial brute force approach. We have of course seen that, like if we go to look at the witch trials in Europe of like the medieval times, the first people that were prosecuted were women, and specifically midwives, because they would take away some of the pain of a woman in childbirth. And there was huge, like crusade level destruction of people like that. So of course that has happened, and it can be very easy for us to take our overlaying pain body from those events that have happened in our ancestry and just put that straight away onto Partick. But I have done that, but as I have sat with it more and I've really taken to heart the beatitude of, like, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be known as the children of God. Like, to be a peacemaker doesn't just mean to keep the peace, it means to actually be in a dynamic process with the conflict to find peace. So I have been in a very dynamic relationship with this inner conflict to find my way to peace in this story. And this is where I have ended up, is that Patrick was more like the wandering Spalpeen Fánach. I don't think he was here with brute force. And when they say that St. Patrick got rid of the snakes, this is my understanding of it. As I mentioned earlier, there were lots of different altars, there were many different rituals, there were many different sacrifices. And as most cultures at that time in human history, there was blood sacrifices. People felt like they had to kill someone or something, whether that be an animal or a person, to say a prayer to God. And when you spill blood, it's like, this blood brother oath. Like, there is a binding in the nature of blood, because blood is an alive substance with all of the DNA and truth of what a being is, and you're offering the spirit of a person or an animal at the same time. So there's a huge spiritual force in that, and there's a huge binding. And much of what Christ's crucifixion is an ultimate bloodletting ritual, so that never had to happen again. It basically took the need, maybe perceived need or actual, I don't know, the perceived need of having to do a bloodletting sacrifice. Christ took that from needing to be a physical act and made it so it existed in the spirit through the blood of Christ. So the blood is still being offered for all the oaths that our ancestors have made through blood that in many ways need to be repaid. Angelic law is different to human law. So there's ways that realm of ancestors and angels and offerings works that is very difficult for us to understand in our small human minds. But so Christ's ultimate sacrifice became the final blood sacrifice that was ever needed. Now, of course, not everyone got that memo at the exact same time in human history, so it's been taking a while for us to actually understand that as a human race. And because that happened, it meant that those rituals would not have been needed anymore. So if we come back to Partick in Ireland, in a time where there was lots of different gods and goddesses, where there was lots of different ancestors, where there was lots of different cultural practices to have your prayers heard by the gods or by God, the message of Christ would have come in with such simplicity. All you need to do is repent, receive the mercy, and give mercy. All you have to do is receive the forgiveness and give forgiveness. And this gospel of love, which was being preached by a slave, by a man who had been a slave in Ireland, who had escaped and returned to the land of his captives to share this gospel of redemptive love. That to me does not speak of a colonizer. And what I see as the snakes that he got rid of, if we look at the snake like the face of evil, is the blood binds that we would have been tied into as a people, which in many ways is still being undone in our bloods. When we really start going into deliverance prayers, there is still a lot of places where our bloodlines are still tied into agreements with other gods, with other spiritual entities, with other spiritual powers. And if you look in Ephesians 6 in the New Testament, it talks about how our spiritual battle is not with flesh, it's not with other people, it's not with flesh and blood. Our spiritual battle is with forces of darkness that want to keep us subdued. So those forces of spiritual darkness that want to keep us subdued and want to keep us trapped would have been using blood oaths and blood rituals to keep us bound as a people. And Christ's ritual, when we can really understand it and have full faith in us, frees us of that forever. It frees us and it frees all of our future bloodlines from that. So my understanding of the snakes is the evil curses and blood-bound oaths that were not serving life, that were not serving love, and were not serving the people of Ireland. That's what St. Patrick came to release. And he did such a powerful job at it, and people understood his teaching so profoundly well that they genuinely were able to step into the gift of that liberation in the blood of Christ. And that's part of what let Ireland become this beacon of the Isle of the Saints and Scholars, and this really bright light in the world where many, many, many people would make pilgrimage to, and many very literate and well-trained scholars would sail to and make pilgrimage to study here. There was many monks that were written here. And of course, at that time, we can also see at a human-to-human level, someone coming from one culture and engaging in a bunch of people from another culture who have a very seemingly demonic way of moving their bodies when they pray or dance or whatever. You know, there was a lot of, just like there is today, a lot of cultural misunderstanding between peoples. That is human. That's not of God. That's not what Patrick would have been bringing. Like if Patrick is who people say he was, and for him to have had such an impact of Ireland and to leave such a legacy that all these years later we're still celebrating him, I believe he was someone who was really emulating Christ's love in a very potent and clear way. So I don't think he would have been in a very small-minded like judgment of like, ugh, those pagans doing this. I think, and of course there's also like different language was used at different times. Just like if we read the Bible, we have to take time to actually learn what the Bible is saying and what it means by this word and that word. Similarly, we're like St. Patrick is in the 4th and 5th century of Ireland. You know, that would have had a very different lens and a very different way of seeing the world, and we've inherited this teaching. And my sense, it is now our duty as modern day mystics or as modern day practitioners of whatever practice we have, it's up to us to like sit with a mature faith and try to understand and decode and understand what was like being passed down. So for me, the banishing of the snakes was the banishing of blood, oaths and curses that were not serving love, that were not serving life. It was not about banishing the Druids. And we can see this as well in, there are certain orders that are still around today, like the Céile Day, which means the children of God. They received Christ wholeheartedly. Like those Druids were learned and studied. They were waiting for Christ because they knew that Christ's energy was the next energy that the earth needed, and they were like waiting for it. So there was many Druids at that time in Ireland who were really open-hearted to the gospel of Christ and were ready and waiting for it. And I'm sure there were many others. There might have been some that maybe didn't believe that or didn't understand that, and that's okay too. And I'm sure there was also many who were power drunk, just like we see today with religious and spiritual leaders, people who are power drunk and power hungry and can be misusing their power, authority over people to enhance their own power by promoting fear, by promoting like rigidness and dogma in ways that again would not have been stewarding life. So just like we have a whole spectrum of like expressions of religious leadership and spiritual leadership now, it would have been the same then. Some people would have been like Nicodemus, super curious and going up to Jesus and being like, is this real? You know, and being there and sitting and being open in dialogue with St. Patrick and wondering what was happening to the collective consciousness. And other people would have been very affronted because he would have been directly challenging their power and taking their power from them. So I feel like this conversation is just a lot more nuanced, and to be honest, I'm getting kind of tired of just seeing these like, oh, let's bring all the snakes back. There were some things that Patrick banished that I do not want to bring back, that were genuinely not helpful to human life and to our well-being and to promoting the forces of goodness. And of course, there are many, 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 many ways that these teachings have been mishandled, and there is so much harm that has been caused. And so it is also really rightful for us to reclaim our connection to, our Druidic heritage and different threads to our Celtic Christian faith and our Celtic faith, like in all of its frames. And as I said earlier, everything true remains when the light body of Christ comes in and lands into an ecosystem. So I said earlier that sometimes it can come in and people seem to look at it like like a colonizing force that smushes and like whitewashes everything away. The way I see it is like that the energy of Christ comes in and it tests everything that's there. It sees what the foundation is like. Some things are true and they will remain, and some things are not true and will need to be removed. And that's like a helpful pruning, you know, and it's human arrogance to think that everything there is perfect. You know, you could also view Christ as like this cosmic presence of love that is testing the integrity of every single atom, every single molecule, every single vibration to see if it's actually rooted in love. And some things are and some things aren't. Like, that's the reality of our human condition. Like, we experience the full spectrum from love to hate, from joy to fear. That's just what we signed up for when we became human. And yeah, Christ is, to me, a guiding light to help us be in the human condition and stay beholden to love. And I think I think St. Patrick was an emissary of that message. I also think he was human. I'm sure he did stuff wrong as well. But I think to tarnish all of who he was through the lens of our institutional anger is an error. And I am hoping that by speaking into this today, I can help in the active peacemaking process around this so that it can be a little bit less conflated and enraged, and that we can come back to a place of lucidity and sobriety in the conversation and be able to look at it like with more nuance from all sides. So that's my spiel for the evening, and I'm really glad I got to speak into this. Tomorrow I'm going to Gugambara to kind of have a hike and make a pilgrimage there with some friends and a lovely husky. So I'm looking forward to that. I love Gugambara. It's such a beautiful spiritual home for me. Again, epicenter of lots of mystical Christian mystics, nature mystics. So yeah, that's my plan for tomorrow. So I wouldn't have been able to come on tomorrow, and I'm glad that I was able to bring my voice in on this piece before St. Patrick's Day, and I hope that it serves you, whether you're watching this on St. Patrick's Day or later. I hope that this is helpful. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, this is a dynamic conversation, so please feel welcome to share your comments and be part of the conversation. Like, what is your felt sense of truth in this story? And I don't expect your felt sense to be identical to mine, because you're your own person and a different fractal of life. So please bring the diversity of opinions, just be respectful as best you can. And Gurv mila buicas laat. Lots of love to you all. Grávor, and talk to you soon.